Performance and compliance. In this video, we'll talk about SharePoint Server 2016 and performance, best practices, and data compliance tools that are available within SharePoint Server 2016. Performance and compliance. In this video, we're going to talk about performance, on how SharePoint performs from the server platform, and what is data compliance. So what are we using it for? Why is it available? And how can it help in governance around your SharePoint farm? We're also going to talk about SharePoint DLP, which is the new tool that is available within SharePoint Server 2016. We'll talk about those components of discovery and policy. And then we'll do a demo of how to set up data compliance in your environment. Performance. In performance, we want to look at capacity. Capacity, that's managing the sizes of your databases and and your site collection. So you want to make sure that you're not going over a threshold. Basically your content databases shouldn't be more than 200 gigabyte. You might want to add some type of threshold on your site collections to make sure that they don't go over that limit as well. If you have a bunch of site collections in one, you want to monitor those site collections to make sure if you got one that's growing pretty fast, maybe you want to move it to another content database. We also want to have alerts. So if it gets 80% or whatever percentage of that capacity is for your content database, you want to make sure that you're alerted so that you can, manage that capacity and manage moving things to a separate content database. Also there's file size. So one of the things that that SharePoint 2016 server does, and I've mentioned this in other videos, is that the 10 gigabyte threshold for file size is actually a lot larger than it was in other versions of SharePoint. So we want to monitor that. One of the ways to get around that is RBS, it's remote blob storage, and there are lots of third-party tools out there that help you manage this. But it basically keeps those large files outside of your content database, which gives you better performance on your content database. And then you can cache those large files on a separate storage component within your environment, which will speed up things for you. So, you want to also size your servers to best practices. If it calls for 4 CPUs, get 4 CPUs. If it calls for 16 gigabyte minimum, you want to make sure you have a minimum of that. You also want to look at your disk speed and make sure that the disks that you're running are, pretty quick and pretty fast so that you get better performance out of your servers. What is data compliance? Before we go onto the slide, one of the other things I wanted to mention too is if you're using large files in your environment, you also want to make sure your download for your crawl size is actually set as well. You could have you may have a large file that doesn't get indexed totally because the indexed information that's coming out of it is larger than what the download capacity is. The software and boundaries website, there is some information on how you can set that for Excel files and other Office files within SharePoint. What is data compliance? So this avoids your data breaches. Most companies, that I've noticed don't know where their data is located within their topology. So, you want to try to set your topology up where where your PII is located, or at least where most companies don't know where their data is located. So, most companies I've been to actually don't know what's going on. The governance of data is not in place. So this is one thing that you want to get under control before moving forward with your implementing this DLP within your SharePoint environment, because you could actually scan all of SharePoint, but how does that affect your performance of your server as well? Well, it doesn't, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But it does, help to know where this data, is located, and if you can put it in different silos, like different site collections, and know that data is PII or is something that you don't want to have breached, and that's the way you should set it up. Another thing too is use your content types, manage metadata, make sure that you're tagging information properly. Those help in your search as well. Identify against policies, so we want to make sure that we're identifying that sensitive data based on policies that we create, which I'm going to show you in the demo. And these policies actually restrict access based on the compliance site collection. And it also sends alerts and gets those sensitive data identified and actually tagged within your site collection. So this is a picture of what is, like a template for compliance. So if you're setting up, different compliances, there are some templates that are available within the site collection templates that actually run against the site collection. So you can see there's SWIFT codes, which are bank codes, sending transactions or credit card numbers, and routing numbers and things like that. Even driver's licenses, and and it gives you how those numbers are actually documented. So if your driver's license is 4 digits dash 4 digits dash 4 digits dash, then that's what it looks for as a pattern within your site collections. So you have your 2 site collection templates that need to be created. So one will be a compliance policy center, and the other is eDiscovery. The eDiscovery engine actually came from Exchange, so they just moved it into SharePoint to get that engine working within SharePoint, which is a very welcome tool. That was one of the things that a lot of customers used to complain about is, how do I, manage, PII, and how come, I can't really put it in there if I can't really put documents in SharePoint if I can't manage it and can't understand, what the data is. We have this tool now, and I think it's very welcomed. In Discovery, we basically set up our search server. We set up our search crawl, and we crawl the content to actually process the policies. So as the crawler is crawling, the process then put those policies against the information that was crawled and then index it. So once it's indexed, we query that information using our site collection tools for DLP that actually find the information within the index and flag those specific documents. Policy, we just want to create, apply, notify, and secure. So we want to make sure that, we create policies that are understandable, little lines of code, and I'll show you that once we get there. And we want to apply those policies to whatever site collection we want to apply them to, or we can do it against all of SharePoint, which would be every site collection that's in SharePoint. Then once that applies, if someone actually accidentally gets to some information that maybe is already secured or has a policy written against it, then it would notify the user, notify the data compliance officer, and basically then secure that information and then leave it up to the data compliance officer to make changes to that data within SharePoint.